They owe humans, and the galaxy is terrified. First document. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so silent. Ambassador of the Empire shifted nervously in his crystalline seat, his four eyes darting between the holographic displays, showing fleet movements across 17 star systems. The numbers were impossible to ignore, yet every species representative in the chamber seemed determined to pretend they weren't real. "The debt calculations are complete," announced Counselor, the ancient Etherian whose translucent form flickered with stress patterns. "The total amount owed to humanity across all registered conflicts, assistance operations, and resource-sharing agreements over the past 2 centuries comes to—" The pause stretched like a dying star. "47 trillion standard credits plus compound interest." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber's atmospheric processors. The delegates' wings began to molt from shock. Even the normally composed representatives' bioluminescent patches flashed in rapid, panicked sequences. "That's impossible," growled Commander On of the warrior caste hegemony, his massive frame rising from his reinforced platform. "No single species could be owed such an amount. The calculation must be flawed." Counselors formed slightly, a sign of deep concentration. "The calculations have been by 17 independent AI systems, including the cosmic ledger maintained by the Bankers Guild. Every transaction, every favor, every life saved, every world defended, all documented with timestamp verification and quantum signatures." The truth was staggering, but the evidence was irrefutable. For over 200 years, humanity had been the galaxy's problem solver. When they faced extinction from a rogue asteroid, human engineers had diverted it using controlled nuclear explosions. When the plague threatened to wipe out their species, human medical researchers worked for 30 years straight to develop a cure. When the Void pirates nearly destroyed the peaceful trade networks, human fleets had hunted them across 3 galactic arms until every last raider was eliminated. Each time, humanity had asked for nothing more than friendship and mutual respect. They never demanded payment, never sought tribute, never claimed territory. They simply helped because it was the right thing to do. The galaxy had grown comfortable with this arrangement, perhaps too comfortable. Ambassador cleared his throat, a sound like grinding crystals. "Surely the humans don't actually expect payment. They've never demanded anything before. This is just an accounting exercise, yes." The chamber's main display suddenly activated, showing the familiar blue and green marble of Earth, along with its expanding colonies across human space. But something was different. The usual warm, welcoming signals from human communication networks were absent. Instead, there was only a single message broadcasting on all frequencies in every known language. "To our galactic neighbors," the voice was calm, professional, utterly without emotion. "Recent internal audits have revealed significant discrepancies in our resource allocation records. Effective immediately, all humanitarian assistance, defense operations, and resource-sharing agreements are suspended pending settlement of outstanding debts. We thank you for your understanding and look forward to resolving this matter promptly." The message repeated every hour on the hour, without variation, without negotiation. "They can't be serious," whispered the representative, her melodic voice cracking with disbelief. "The Scourge fleet is massing near the outer rim. Without human support, the border worlds won't last a month." "The hegemony doesn't need human help," Commander On declared, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "We have fought our own battles for—" "Against the Scourge?" Counselor's question hung in the air like a death sentence. "The same Scourge that destroyed the hegemony's 7th fleet last year, the fleet that only survived because human reinforcements arrived with experimental shield technology." The warrior commander's silence spoke volumes. Doctor of the Scientific Consortium pulled up historical records with trembling manipulator arms. "Look at this data. Humanitarian assistance to 14 species over the past 50 years alone. The humans saved the aquatic builders when their sun began dying. They literally moved their entire species to a new star system. They taught the hive minds how to resist the neural plague. They've been the first responders to every crisis, every disaster, every threat." The records were overwhelming. Natural disasters, wars, plagues, economic collapses. In every case, humanity had appeared with resources, knowledge, and manpower to help. They had never asked for anything except the chance to be good neighbors. "But why now?" asked the delegate. "What changed?" Humans have never cared about money or resources. They share their technology freely, their knowledge openly. This doesn't match their psychological profile. Counselor accessed deeper records, diving into the quantum-encrypted files that few had clearance to view. What she found made her form flicker with something approaching fear. "There's more," she announced. "The suspension of aid isn't just about money. According to intercepted internal communications, humanity is reconsidering their place in galactic society." The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. "What does that mean?" His voice was barely a whisper. "It means," continued, her voice heavy with implications, "that they're tired of being taken for granted. The communication logs show increasing frustration over the past decade. References to one-sided relationships and exploitation disguised as friendship. They've been keeping track of every favor, every resource expenditure, every life risked for galactic peace." The truth was worse than they had imagined. Humanity hadn't suddenly become greedy, they had simply reached a breaking point. 2 centuries of giving everything and receiving nothing in return had finally taken its toll. "Look at these statistics." Doctor's voice was shaking as she projected new data. "Human colonies have the lowest resource allocation per in the galaxy, despite being the most productive. Their military has the highest casualty rate because they're always the first to volunteer for dangerous missions. Their scientists work longer hours for less recognition than any other species. And in return," added another voice from the chamber's observation deck, "what have we given them?" The question came from an unexpected source, ambassador of the isolationist bloc, a group that rarely participated in galactic affairs. "We've taken their help, their resources, their lives, and we've given them what? Seats on committees, participation in trade deals that primarily benefit everyone else, token recognition for saving entire civilizations." The uncomfortable truth settled over the chamber like a toxic cloud. They had all been complicit in treating humanity as the galaxy's unpaid security force, disaster relief agency, and research division. "The scourge situation is escalating," reported a military aide, his transmission crackling with urgency. "Our intelligence networks show massive fleet buildup in the void sectors. Without human early warning systems and defensive coordination, the Rim colonies are defenseless." Commander On stood again, his warriors' pride warring with practical reality. "How long before the scourge reaches inhabited systems?" 6 standard weeks, came the grim reply. "Maybe less if they've developed new drive systems." "And our combined fleets? What's our defensive capability without human support?" The silence that followed was more terrifying than any battle cry. Doctor pulled up tactical assessments, her scientific training overriding her emotional distress. "Human fleets represent approximately 37% of total galactic defensive capability, but that's just raw numbers. Their strategic coordination, early warning networks, and tactical innovation represent nearly 60% of our actual defensive effectiveness." "You mean without them?" Couldn't finish the sentence. "We lose," completed Counselor. "Not just battles, not just territory, we lose everything. The scourge won't stop at the Rim. They'll sweep through the galaxy like a plague, and without human organization and leadership, our resistance will collapse within a year." The chamber erupted into panicked discussions as representatives began calculating what their individual species could contribute to the debt settlement. The numbers were staggering. 47 trillion credits was more than most civilizations' entire annual economic output. "Wait," called out the Bankers Guild representative, his mechanical voice cutting through the chaos. "There's another factor we haven't considered. The debt calculation includes compound interest at standard galactic rates, but it also includes opportunity costs." "Opportunity costs?" "Resources and development opportunities that humanity gave up to help others instead of advancing their own civilization. When they spent 30 years curing the plague, they could have used those resources to expand their own territory or develop new technologies. When they diverted materials to rebuild the trade networks, they delayed their own infrastructure projects." The numbers began climbing on the main display as the AI systems recalculated. 47 trillion became 53 trillion, then 59 trillion. "Stop the calculation," whispered, "we understand." But the real horror wasn't the money. It was the realization of what humanity had sacrificed. While other species had expanded, grown wealthy, and developed their civilizations, Humans had spent their resources, their time, and their lives maintaining galactic peace and prosperity. They could have conquered half the galaxy by now, mused Doctor, her scientific mind working through the implications. With their innovation, their adaptability, their willingness to take risks, they could have built an empire to rival the ancients. Instead, they chose to be gardeners, tending to the growth of other civilizations. And now the garden is in debt to the gardener, added grimly. A new communication burst through the chamber's secure channels. The sender was identified as Admiral Sarah of the Human Defense Force, and her message was brief but earth-shaking. Galactic Council representatives. Her voice was professional, but carried an undertone of steel that made several delegates shiver. We have received numerous requests for clarification regarding our recent policy changes. To be absolutely clear, all military assistance, research collaboration, disaster relief, and resource sharing agreements are suspended indefinitely pending resolution of outstanding obligations. The transmission continued. This includes early warning systems for scourge activity, defensive fleet coordination, emergency medical assistance, and technological support. We will honor existing contracts only if payment is rendered in advance. Furthermore, Admiral's voice grew colder, we have noted several instances of misunderstanding regarding the voluntary nature of our past assistance. To clarify, friendship is not slavery, goodwill is not weakness, and generosity has limits. The transmission ended with coordinates for a neutral meeting station and a deadline, 30 standard days to propose a settlement arrangement. As the chamber fell into stunned silence, Counselor made a connection that chilled her ethereal form to its core. She accessed the deep archives, the sealed records that contain the galaxy's most closely guarded secrets. Council members, her voice barely registered above the chamber's environmental systems. I've found something, the reason for humanity's timing, why they're calling in debts now. The archive data projected across the chamber showed deep space sensor readings, gravitational anomalies, and energy signatures that conventional understanding. The Devourers, she whispered. The name sent shockwaves through every species present. The Devourers, the ancient enemy that had destroyed the first galactic civilization millions of years ago, were stirring again in the space between galaxies. Human deep space monitoring stations detected the first signals 3 months ago. They've been preparing for a threat that makes the Scourge look like children with toys. And while they've been working on defenses, making contingency plans, preparing for the survival of galactic civilization, we've been taking their help for granted. The truth hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't just been keeping track of favors, they had been preparing for the ultimate test. And they had realized that if the galaxy was going to survive what was coming, the days of one-sided sacrifice had to end. They're not angry, Doctor said quietly, her scientific mind piecing together the pattern. They're teaching us, forcing us to understand what we've been taking for granted before it's too late. Teaching us what? Asked. That we're not children anymore, replied. That if we want their protection when the real enemy arrives, we need to start acting like partners instead of dependents. The chamber's displays showed fleet movements across the galaxy as various species began mobilizing resources, not for defense, but for payment. The irony was bitter. The same civilizations that had grown strong under human protection were now scrambling to prove their worth to the very species they had been exploiting. As the session concluded and delegates rushed to contact there, one thought echoed through the chamber's quantum communication networks. They owe humans, and the galaxy had finally realized just how much that debt would cost to repay. But the real price wouldn't be measured in credits or resources. It would be measured in pride, independence, and the uncomfortable recognition that humanity had never been their servants. They had been their guardians, watching over an ungrateful galaxy while preparing for threats none of them had imagined. The question now wasn't whether they could afford to pay the debt. The question was whether they could afford not to when the Devourers finally arrived. They owe humans, and the galaxy is terrified. Second document. The Imperial Palace had never hosted such a gathering. Representatives from 43 species crowded into the crystalline halls, their various atmospheric requirements creating a rainbow of environmental bubbles throughout the ancient chambers. The desperation was palpable. 3 weeks had passed since humanity's ultimatum, and the galaxy was beginning to crack under the pressure. Ambassador stood before a massive holographic display showing the current debt calculations. The numbers had grown again as human accounting systems continued their merciless audit. 61 trillion credits and climbing, with new categories of debt being discovered daily. The catastrophe of 2387, announced the cold, mechanical voice of the human accounting AI that had been granted limited access to present the findings. Human engineering teams prevented the collapse of 3 orbital habitats, saving 2.3 billion lives. Estimated value of lives saved, plus resources expended, plus opportunity costs, 412 billion credits. Princess of the writhed in her atmospheric tank, her normally silver scales turning a deep purple with shame. We offered them mining rights to our asteroid belts. They declined, saying our friendship was payment enough. The Trade War Resolution 2390-42399, the AI continued. Human diplomatic intervention and military support prevented galactic economic collapse. Estimated prevented losses, 2 trillion credits. Human payment received, ceremonial artwork valued at 3,000 credits. Elder O of the consortium began harmonizing a song of mourning, her crystalline form resonating with guilt-induced frequencies that made several other species delegates cover their auditory receptors. The Exodus 24012-403, the list continued relentlessly. Human transport fleets relocated entire population ahead of stellar collapse. Resources expended, 800 billion credits. Payment received, promise of eternal gratitude. The delegates' wings had stopped molting from shock. Now they were falling out entirely from stress. Doctor had been working around the clock with her research teams, trying to find some way to challenge the calculations. But every number checked out, every transaction was documented with quantum-level precision. Humanity had been keeping perfect records while everyone else had been keeping perfect ignorance. There has to be some mistake, insisted Commander On, though his voice had lost all its earlier bluster. These numbers represent more wealth than exists in the galaxy. Incorrect, replied the AI. These numbers represent the true cost of galactic civilization. The hegemony alone owes 3.7 trillion credits for military assistance over the past 50 years. Would the commander prefer an itemized list? On's warrior pride finally crumbled. We offered them battle bonds, sacred oaths of brotherhood. Sacred oaths, the AI noted with mechanical precision, have no monetary value according to Galactic Trade, Standard 4472. However, they have been noted in the cultural significance category for potential settlement consideration. Ambassador of the isolationist bloc raised a manipulator arm. My people deliberately avoided requesting human assistance. Surely we owe nothing. Incorrect, the AI responded. The isolationist bloc benefited from galactic stability maintained by human intervention. Economic analysis shows your trade profits increased by 340% over the past century due to stable trade routes and peaceful borders. Your debt stands at 890 billion credits. Its environmental suit began cycling stress hormones so rapidly that the atmospheric processors started warning of toxicity levels. The real shock came when Princess accessed her people's historical archives. I've been reviewing our records, she announced to the assembly. The humans, they never even told us most of this was debt. Look at these communication logs. The holographic display showed decades of human communications. Everyone was polite, friendly, and focused entirely on the crisis at hand. There were no mentions of cost, no requests for payment, no hints that they were tracking expenses. Here's a message from Admiral Torres during the crisis, continued, her voice breaking. Please don't worry about costs or obligations. We're all neighbors in this galaxy. Neighbors help neighbors. That's what he said while they were bankrupting themselves to save us. Doctor pulled up similar records from the consortium's archives. Same pattern here. During the trade war, Captain Martinez told our negotiators, justice doesn't come with a price tag. We fight for what's right because it's right. Meanwhile, their calculations show they spent their entire annual military budget and half their emergency reserves. The pattern was consistent across every species, every crisis, every intervention. Humanity had given everything while asking for nothing, all while keeping perfect records of their generosity. They had never once mentioned debt or payment or obligation. They had simply helped because help was needed. Why, whispered Elder her harmonic frequencies shifting to confusion. Why keep such detailed records if they never intended to collect? The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Maria Santos of the Human Diplomatic Corps had arrived unannounced, her small shuttle docking at the palace without ceremony or fanfare. She walked into the assembly hall alone, wearing a simple uniform with no weapons, no guards, no show of force. Because, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, we knew this day would come. The assembled delegates turned to face her, and many were shocked by what they saw. Captain Santos was young by human standards, perhaps 40 years old, but her eyes held a weariness that seemed ancient. Her uniform was worn but clean, practical rather than decorative, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. We kept records, Santos continued, moving to the center of the chamber, because we knew eventually you would need to understand the true cost of peace, not to punish you but to prepare you. Prepare us for what? Asked. Santos gestured, and her personal interface projected a new set of images into the chamber's display system. Deep space photographs, energy readings, gravitational anomalies, that explanation. The Devourers have begun moving, she announced simply. Our deep space monitoring stations detected the first scout fleet 6 weeks ago. Full invasion force will reach Galactic Rim in approximately 18 months. The chamber erupted into panic, but Santos raised her hand and somehow, impossibly, the chaos settled into terrified silence. We've been preparing for this for over a century, she continued. Not just militarily, logistically, economically, socially. The coming war will require every resource, every innovation, every life in the galaxy, but it will also require something we've never had before, true cooperation. Commander On found his voice. What does that have to do with this debt collection? Because, Santos replied, for the past 2 centuries you've all been children, well-meaning children, but children nonetheless. You've grown strong under our protection, but you've never learned to share the burden of leadership. When the Devourers arrive, we can't afford to have 43 species looking to one species to solve every problem. Doctor's analytical mind began working through the implications. You're not trying to bankrupt us, you're trying to teach us to be partners. Finally, Santos smiled, but it was a tired smile. Doctor understands. The debt isn't punishment, it's education. How can you value something you've never had to pay for? How can you understand sacrifice when someone else always makes it for you? Princess Scales shifted to a deep blue of understanding. You want us to appreciate what we've taken for granted. More than that, Santos replied. We want you to be capable of giving it yourselves. When the Devourers come, humanity can't be the galaxy's only guardian anymore. We need 44 species of guardians. The implications were staggering. For 2 centuries, the galaxy had operated under the assumption that humanity would always be there to solve problems, to pay costs, to make sacrifices. They had built their entire civilization on that foundation. But the debt, stammered, 61 trillion credits, that's impossible to pay. In credits, yes, Santos agreed, but who said anything about credits? She gestured again, and the display changed to show something unexpected. Detailed plans for defensive installations, research facilities, training centers, and manufacturing complexes. This is the real payment we're looking for, Santos explained. The Fortress Worlds project, 43 heavily defended systems, each protected and maintained by a different species. Not paid for by humans, not built by humans, not defended by humans. Built, paid for, and defended by the species that calls that system home. Elder A's harmonic frequencies shifted to something approaching hope. You want us to defend ourselves. We want you to defend each other, Santos corrected. The consortium has the finest logistics network in the galaxy. We want you to coordinate supply lines for all 43 Fortress worlds. They have the best crystalline technology. We want you to design communication systems that can't be jammed or intercepted. The hegemony has the finest warriors. We want you to train mixed species units that can fight as one. The chamber fell silent as the delegates began to understand. This wasn't about money, it was about transformation. Humanity was offering to cancel a debt too large to ever be repaid in exchange for something far more valuable, equality. Each species will contribute what they do best, Santos continued. Each species will defend not just their own world, but their neighbors' worlds. Each species will share not just resources, but knowledge, technology, and responsibility. Commander On stood slowly. You're asking us to become what you've been all along. We're asking you to become what the galaxy needs, Santos replied. What it's always needed, not one species carrying everyone else, but 44 species carrying each other. Doctor pulled up the Fortress World specifications, her scientific mind racing through the possibilities. These designs, they're not just defensive installations. They're research centers, manufacturing hubs, training facilities. Each one would be a completely self-sufficient civilization center. And each one would be a massive economic boost to the species that builds it, added Princess, her aristocratic training recognizing the financial implications. The construction alone would create millions of jobs, drive innovation, establish new trade relationships. You're offering to turn our debt into our greatest economic opportunity, realized Ambassador. We're offering to turn your debt into your independence, Santos corrected. Right now, if humanity disappeared tomorrow, galactic civilization would collapse within a decade. After the Fortress Worlds project, if any single species disappeared, the galaxy would mourn them but continue to thrive. The beauty of the plan was becoming clear. Each fortress world would be designed around the strengths and culture of its sponsoring species. The aquatic builders would create underwater installations that could survive any surface bombardment. The hive minds would design systems that could coordinate instantly across vast distances. The Etherians would build fortresses that existed partially in other dimensions, impossible for conventional forces to attack. But the timeline worried. 18 months before the Devourers arrive, can 43 fortress worlds really be built in 18 months? Not built, Santos smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. That's the final surprise. We've been building them for the past 50 years. The chamber exploded into chaos again as delegates shouted questions, accusations, and demands for explanation. Santos waited patiently for the noise to die down before continuing. We've been preparing for this day since we first detected Devourer technology signatures in deep space. Every favor we did, every problem we solved, every crisis we resolved, we used those opportunities to scout locations, test technologies, and build relationships. The fortress worlds are 90% complete. All they need now is for each species to take ownership. Doctor's voice was barely a whisper. You've been playing a game none of us even knew was being played. We've been playing the only game that matters, Santos replied. Survival, not just human survival, galactic survival. But we learned something from studying the Devourer's previous campaigns. They don't just destroy civilizations, they study them first. They look for weaknesses, dependencies, single points of failure. Like one species doing everything for everyone else, realized Commander On. Exactly. A galaxy dependent on one species is a galaxy with one weakness. The Devourers would have targeted humanity first, and without us, you would have fallen like dominoes. But a galaxy of 44 independent, cooperating species, that's something they've never faced before. Princess accessed her people's strategic databases. The debt calculations, they weren't just accounting, they were psychological warfare against ourselves. Teaching tools, Santos corrected gently. We needed you to understand the true cost of civilization before you could appreciate the true value of independence. How do you make someone understand the weight of responsibility? You show them exactly how much responsibility they've been avoiding. The delegates began to understand the full scope of what humanity had done. For 2 centuries, they had been gardeners and teachers and protectors, but they had also been planners. Every act of kindness had been genuine, but it had also been preparation. Every favor had been freely given, but it had also been investment in a future where such favors wouldn't be necessary. So what happens now? Asked Ildura. Santos gestured one final time, and the display showed a document, the Fortress Worlds Compact. Now you choose, she said simply. You can pay the debt in credits if you can figure out how to raise 61 trillion in 7 days. Or you can accept responsibility for your own defense, your own prosperity, and your own future. And if we refuse both options? Asked Ambassador. Santos' expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Then you continue as you have been, children under our protection until the Devourers arrive. And when they do arrive, you'll face them as you've faced every other crisis, waiting for humanity to save you. The choice was clear, and terrifying and necessary. The galaxy could continue to be humanity's dependent, or it could finally grow up and become humanity's equal. As the delegates began to realize the full implications of their decision, Captain Santos turned to leave, but she paused at the chamber's entrance. "One more thing," she said without turning around. "The fortress worlds aren't just defensive installations. They're also evacuation centers. If we lose, if the Devourers prove too strong, each fortress world can evacuate the entire population of its sector to prepared fallback positions in other galaxies." "You've planned for our retreat too?" asked Doctor. "We've planned for every possibility," Santos replied. "But there's one plan we haven't told you about. The one where 44 species fight as one, where every civilization contributes their greatest strengths, where the galaxy finally becomes what it was always meant to be." "What's that?" whispered. Santos finally turned back to face them, and for the first time her smile was brilliant with hope. "The plan where we win, they owe humans, and the galaxy is terrified." Third document. The signing of the Fortress Worlds Compact should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, the ceremony aboard the neutral station Harmony's Rest felt more like a funeral for the old galaxy. Representatives from 43 species gathered in the station's central amphitheater, each carrying the weight of their people's decision and the terrifying responsibility it represented. Ambassador stood at the delegation's table, his crystalline fingers hovering over the quantum signature pad. Around him, the soft hum of atmospheric processors mixed with the nervous sounds of dozens of species, chittering, harmonizing, electromagnetic pulses, and biochemical emissions that created a symphony of anxiety. "The Fortress Worlds Compact," announced Captain Santos from the central platform, "represents more than a settlement of debt. It represents the birth of a new kind of galactic civilization." Doctor had spent the past week reviewing every clause, every specification, every technical detail of the agreement. The scope was breathtaking. Each species would take full ownership of one fortress world, including its construction, defense, and operation. But more than that, each species would also commit to defending 2 neighboring fortress worlds, creating an interconnected web of mutual protection. "The fortress will be designated Crystal Guard," Santos continued, "specializing in quantum communication networks and crystalline matrix defensive systems. The Empire will also serve as backup defenders for the Trade Hub and the Sky Fortress." Felt the weight of history as he pressed his hand to the signature pad. For the first time in his people's history, they would be responsible not just for their own survival, but for the survival of others. The debt forgiveness was almost irrelevant compared to the transformation this represented. Princess of the approached her own signing station. "The deep station will focus on asteroid mining and mobile defensive platforms," Santos announced. "The kingdom will back up the aquatic builder's ocean fortress and the Etherian phase station." One by one, each species committed to their new role. But the signing ceremony was interrupted by an urgent communication from the edge of the galaxy. "Priority alert from Deep Space Monitor Station 7, the voice crackled with interference. "Devourer scout fleets have accelerated their approach. Revised timeline, 12 months to initial contact, not 18. The amphitheater fell silent except for the environmental systems. 12 months to prepare for a war that could destroy galactic civilization. 12 months to transform 44 dependent species into a united defense force. "That changes nothing," Captain Santos said calmly. "If anything, it confirms that our timeline was correct. The fortress worlds are ready for occupation. The question is whether you're ready to occupy them." Elder of the consortium stood slowly, her crystalline form resonating with determination rather than fear. "The consortium can have our logistics network fully operational within 6 weeks. Our trade hub fortress will be ready for full operation within 8 weeks. Commander On of the Hegemony slammed his massive fist on his table, but this time it was a gesture of commitment rather than anger. "The warrior fortresses will be battle-ready within 4 weeks. My people have been waiting their entire history for a war worth fighting." The momentum was building. Doctor accessed her research consortium's capabilities through her neural interface. "The science fortress can begin advanced research operations within 10 weeks. Our priority will be analyzing Devourer technology and developing countermeasures." As each species committed to their timeline, Captain Santos called up a real-time display of the fortress worlds. Massive constructions across 43 star systems, each one a marvel of engineering adapted to its species, unique capabilities and needs. The beauty of this system, Santos explained, is that each fortress world represents your species' greatest strengths. The hive mind's collective fortress can coordinate the thoughts and strategies of trillions of individuals instantly. The aquatic builder's ocean fortress can survive direct impacts from planet-killing weapons. The Etherian's phase station exists partially in another dimension, making it nearly impossible to attack directly. Ambassador of the isolationist bloc had been silent during most of the ceremony, but now he spoke up. The Void Station will be fully operational within 6 weeks. My people may prefer isolation, but we understand the value of choosing our own isolation rather than having it forced upon us. The signing continued, but Captain Santos noticed something that made her smile with genuine pride. The delegates weren't just committing to their own fortress worlds, they were already beginning to coordinate with each other. The quantum communications can provide instantaneous coordination between all fortress worlds, was explaining to Dr. But we'll need your research consortium to help optimize the quantum entanglement matrices. The trade networks can ensure rapid resource distribution, Eldora added to Commander On. But we'll need hegemony protection for our transport fleets during the construction phase. Princess was deep in discussion with the aquatic builder representative about combining their mobile platforms with underwater manufacturing capabilities. For the first time in galactic history, the species weren't looking to humanity to solve their coordination problems. They were solving them themselves. There's something else, Captain Santos announced as the signing concluded. Something we haven't told you about the Fortress worlds. Each one contains a special edition, a complete backup of human knowledge and technology. The chamber stirred with surprise. Not just our military technology, Santos clarified, but everything. Our art, our philosophy, our history, our mistakes, our dreams. If humanity doesn't survive the war with the Devourers, we want to ensure that our contribution to galactic civilization survives. Doctor's voice was quiet but clear, and if we don't survive, then the fortress worlds become arcs, Santos replied. Each one capable of preserving your species' knowledge and culture for future generations. The Devourers have destroyed civilizations before, but they've never faced an enemy that planned for its own resurrection. The true scope of human planning was becoming clear. They hadn't just built a defensive network, they had built a preservation system for galactic civilization itself. Each fortress world would be a repository for the knowledge and culture of all 44 species. But there's one more element to the plan, Santos continued. The fortress worlds aren't just for defense, they're also for offense. A new display appeared showing technical specifications that made even Doctor gasp. Each fortress world is equipped with a quantum displacement drive, Santos explained. In simple terms, they can move, not just through space, but through dimensions. If the Devourers somehow break through our defenses, the fortress worlds can evacuate to prepared positions in parallel dimensions and continue the fight from there. You're talking about warfare, whispered. We're talking about survival by any means necessary, Santos corrected. The Devourers destroyed the first galactic civilization by being more advanced and more ruthless than anyone expected. We intend to win by being more prepared and more adaptable than they can imagine. Commander On studied the displacement drive specifications with a warrior's eye for tactics. These drives, they could also be used to strike at the Devourer's home dimension. Eventually, yes, Santos agreed. But first we have to survive their initial assault, and that's where your transformation from dependents to partners becomes critical. The next phase of preparation began immediately. Each species sent their finest engineers, scientists, military leaders, and administrators to their assigned fortress world. But there was a surprise waiting for them when they arrived. Doctor was among the first to reach the Science Fortress, a massive installation in orbit around a triple star system that provided unlimited energy. What she found there changed her understanding of humanity forever. Captain Santos, she transmitted back to Harmony's Rest, her voice filled with awe. These facilities, they're not just advanced, they're impossible. Some of this technology is centuries ahead of anything we thought existed. Santos' reply was calm, but tinged with something that might have been sadness. Doctor, there's something we need to tell you about human history, something we've never shared with the galaxy. The transmission that followed was broadcast to all 43 Fortress worlds simultaneously, reaching every species representative at once. Humanity didn't develop this technology, Santos announced. We inherited it. 3,000 years ago, we were contacted by another species, the Builders. They were the survivors of the first civilization the Devourers destroyed. They had spent millions of years in hiding, preparing for the Devourers' return. The revelation sent shockwaves through the galactic community. The Builders chose humanity to carry on their legacy not because we were the strongest but because we were the most willing to sacrifice for others. They gave us their technology, their knowledge, and their mission. Everything we've done for the past 3 has been preparation for this moment. Princess stood in the command center of the deep station, staring at Builder technology that every law of physics she understood. You've been guardians not just of our galaxy, but of a legacy spanning millions of years. And now, Santos continued, we're passing that legacy to you. Not just the technology, but the responsibility. The Builder's mission isn't to destroy the Devourers, it's to evolve beyond them. To become something they can't destroy, something they can't predict, something they can't understand. Commander on examined Builder weapons systems that could crack planets like eggs, yet were designed with safeguards that prevented their use except in the most desperate circumstances. These weapons, they're more powerful than anything the Devourers possess, according to our intelligence. Power isn't the answer, Santos explained. The Builders were more powerful than the Devourers too, and they still lost. The Devourers' strength isn't in their weapons, it's in their unity. They think as one, act as one, adapt as one. The only way to defeat them is to become something they've never faced, a collective that's stronger than the sum of its parts but still maintains the diversity that makes adaptation possible. Eldera harmonized a complex melody from the trade hub, her crystalline form resonating with new understanding. You want us to become what the Builders couldn't, a truly united galactic civilization. We want you to become what we all should have been from the beginning, Santos replied. Not a collection of species depending on one guardian, but a family of species protecting each other. The transformation was remarkable. Within 8 weeks, the Fortress worlds were fully operational and staffed by their respective species. But more importantly, the psychological transformation was complete. Species that had spent centuries as humanity's dependents were now taking initiative, making decisions, and solving problems without looking to others for guidance. The quantum communication network was operational ahead of schedule, providing instantaneous coordination across all Fortress worlds. The logistics network was moving supplies and personnel with an efficiency that surpassed even human operations. The hegemony warriors were training mixed-species units that fought with a coordination no single species could achieve alone. There's one final element to the plan, Captain Santos announced during the first Joint Fortress World Conference. Something we've been working on since the day we inherited the Builder's legacy. The display showed a new construction, massive beyond comprehension, located in the space between galaxies. The Unity Station, Santos explained. A mobile command center that exists partially in normal space and partially in the quantum dimension. It's designed to coordinate the defense of not just our galaxy, but any galaxy the Devourers threaten. Doctor studied the specifications with growing amazement. This isn't just a military installation. It's a mobile civilization. It could sustain millions of beings indefinitely while traveling between galaxies. It's humanity's gift to the future, Santos said quietly. If our galaxy falls, the Unity Station will carry representatives from all 44 species to warn other galaxies, to help them prepare, to ensure that the Builder's legacy continues. But Ambassador noticed something in the specifications that others had missed. Captain Santos, according to these plans, the Unity Station requires crew from all 44 species to operate. It's designed so that no single species can control it. That's correct, Santos smiled. The Builder's greatest mistake was believing one species could guard the galaxy alone. We won't repeat that error. The Unity Station will be crewed, commanded, and controlled by representatives from every species in the galaxy. Princess understood the implications immediately. You're ensuring that whatever survives the war with the Devourers, it will be truly galactic. No single species will ever again bear the burden of protecting civilization alone. And no single species will ever again be dependent on another for their survival, added Commander On. As the conference concluded and representatives returned to their fortress worlds to make final preparations, Captain Santos stood alone on the observation deck of Harmony's Rest, looking out at the stars that held their new defensive network. Admiral joined her, carrying reports from deep space monitoring stations. The Devourer scout fleets have reached the Galactic Rim, reported. Full invasion force will arrive in 6 months, exactly as projected. And our people, Santos asked. Ready, all 43 fortress worlds report full operational status. The species integration is exceeding all projections. They're not just cooperating, they're innovating together, creating solutions none of us anticipated. Santos nodded, but her expression remained serious. And the Unity Station? Construction will be complete in 4 months. The Joint Crew Training Program is ahead of schedule. For the first time in human history, we won't be going into a critical mission alone. For a moment, both officers stood in contemplative silence, watching the distant glow of fortress worlds across the galaxy. Do you think we've done enough? Asked finally. We've done something better than enough, Santos replied. We've done what the builders never could. We've created a galaxy that doesn't need guardians because every species has learned to be guardians themselves. The irony was profound. Humanity had spent 3,000 years preparing for a war, but their greatest victory wasn't military. It was educational. They had transformed a galaxy of dependents into a galaxy of defenders, not through conquest or coercion, but through patience and generosity followed by necessary tough love. The debt collection was the kindest thing we ever did for them, observed. No, Santos corrected, her voice soft with emotion. Teaching them they didn't need us was the kindest thing we ever did for them. As if summoned by their conversation, communications began arriving from across the galaxy. Not requests for help or guidance, but reports and updates from species taking responsibility for their own defense and the defense of their neighbors. Quantum Network reports all fortress worlds linked and secure. Logistics confirms all supply lines operational and redundant. Hegemony warriors report joint training exercises exceeding all performance targets. Mobile platforms ready for rapid deployment to any threatened sector. Each report was a declaration of independence, a statement of readiness, a promise that the galaxy would no longer depend on one species to protect them all. The Devourers were coming, but they would not find the same galaxy that had fallen to them before. They would find 44 species that had learned the most important lesson in the universe. True strength comes not from being protected, but from protecting each other. The debt was paid, the galaxy was ready, and for the first time in 3,000 years, humanity could face the future knowing they would not face it alone.